Next, we're going to work on our sub-assemblies. Once again, we recommend that you work at them one at a time so as to avoid confusion with extra parts laying about. In order to properly work on them, we recommend that you purchase or borrow, rent, a small spring compressor such as this. It's well worth the money you'll spend on it. A substitute for a spring compressor such as this could be C-clamps or vice grips. We do not recommend the use of these substitute tools as a spring compressor due to the possibility of personal injury and or parts damage. Keeping an order of our components from the last removed from the case to the first, it is time to work on our input shaft forward clutch assembly. To disassemble it, we first need to remove this large snap ring which holds our clutch pack in place. When removing these snap rings, always try and keep one finger over the snap ring about halfway across from the gap. That will avoid it popping out and hitting you. After the snap ring, we have a pressure plate, followed by our soft and hard clutch set. This clutch set, like the previous one, is showing signs of overheating and rapid wear. This is also due to an internal leak that we had mentioned earlier in the piston assembly. We want to take note of the way these clutches are stacked, and also the fact that in this setup, the final steel plate is actually a spring. This Wavies plate must go back in first against the activating piston. This is where we now need to use our spring compressor to remove the spring plate so we can remove our piston and clean and inspect the entire assembly. When using the compressor, you want to center the work in the compressor so that the center of your shaft is directly under the lead screw on your compressor. Also, the shoes should be centered and directly across from each other on a spring retainer. Also, make sure that you position the unit so that the gap in your snap retaining ring is easily accessible and not blocked by one of the shoes. This will make it a lot easier to remove with your pliers. Once you've accomplished this location, you want to just turn down on the lead screw enough to release the tension off the snap ring. Inserting your pliers within the end of your retaining ring. Also, I'm going to take my other hand and place my finger within the confines of the snap ring. That way, as it shoots up out of place, it's trapped and can't go flying across the room or hit me in the face. Hold the shoe bar with one hand and release the tension on the lead screw. You can remove the shoes now. Lift off your spring retainer. Remove all your springs and lift out the piston. And that completes disassembly of the forward clutch assembly. This is the forward clutch piston. You want to always replace all soft seals throughout the transmission. On this particular piece, to remove the soft seals, all you have to do is grab them, the inner seal, pull it down toward the center, and then back up. Taking a look at this piston seal, you notice has a very distinct cross section and only can be reinstalled one way. The outer seal removes the opposite way by pulling it away from the unit and then lifting it off. This seal also has a distinctive cross-section and can only be installed one way. A rule to note is that all seal lips face the direction of oil travel. The piston is applied from oil coming up from this side to push it into the clutch pack. Therefore, the lip of the seal faces into the direction that the oil flow is supplied. Always keep soft seal components such as this with the part they came from. During reassembly, you will match the new parts to the old parts and make sure they're the right components and they fit. Once you've assured yourself that they are correct, then and only then should you discard the old pieces. This will help you avoid a lot of confusion and trouble during reassembly. If you look through your rebuilding kit, you'll notice that many of these seals are very similar in size and design. However, only the correct seal in the proper location will function properly. Now that we have selected our proper seals for our forward clutch assembly, we can discard the old ones. Before installing our new seal rings, we want to dip them in the transmission fluid to lubricate them. This is the fun part of the job where everything gets messy. This particular piston seal is installed with the outer lip facing into the direction of oil flow. The oil flow will be coming against the piston this way to move it into the hub. As it moves in that direction, it applies pressure on the clutch plates and engages that particular section of the transmission. After you've laid the ring in, run your fingers all the way around it to make sure it's seated properly in the groove. The same thing with the internal ring. The actual sealing lip faces into the direction of oil flow. Once again, we dip our piston ring into the fluid and install it by inserting the lip into the groove and working it around. Once it's in, we run our hand around it again to make sure it's properly seated. We also want to take some transmission fluid or assembly lube and wipe it into the drum where the seal is going to make contact. Now we get to the fun part, and that's to get this piston assembly seated properly into the drum without damaging these delicate seals. They're not going to want to go on. By cocking the piston slightly, getting one side caught, and pushing it over to the other side, we can get most of the inner seal engaged. At this time, we need a little bit of help with a tool such as this. This tool is simply some 10/1000 diameter piano wire that's been looped over and crimped into a piece of 3/16 brake tubing. This tool, if we place it between the hub and the piston area, we can run it around and depress the lip of the seal back without damaging it. At this time, we've engaged the inner seal, but the outer seal still needs to be worked in. By putting our loop down between the drum and the seal, we can work it around the diameter while gently pressing in and sometimes rotating the piston assembly lightly and work this seal in. Once the lip seals are properly seated, the piston will push in and seat to the bottom of the bore. You'll feel it go down and you hear a rush of air come out. Next, we're going to use our spring compressor to reinstall our springs and our spring retainer. We've landed our hub assembly and our spring compressor and positioned all our springs into the piston. Now we're going to put our cover plate back on the springs, making sure that all the ends of the springs are encompassed by the cover. There we go. Have to put our legs back on the compressor. It's important to align it properly so that the spring plate, the spring retainer, moves down squarely over its retaining hub. And by keeping it properly aligned, it won't get caught in the snap ring retainer groove. If it does, and you continue to apply pressure with a spring retainer, you could bend and ruin the spring retainer. Now all we have to do is apply our snap ring back into its appropriate groove, making sure that it locks all the way down in the groove, and slowly release tension until the spring retainer is seated against the lock ring. With the spring plate back in its loaded position, you'll notice that the lug on the spring plate shrouds the retaining ring, ensuring that it cannot come loose from its groove during operation. The first thing to be reinstalled in your clutch pack in the forward clutch assembly is your cushion spring. So you call that's the one with a wavy face. Next, against that spring, we put a separator in, followed by a friction disc, and then we alternate from the steels to the friction disc to complete the clutch pack. With the final friction plate in place, we can now install the pressure plate. Never have a steel contacting the pressure plate. It should always be a friction plate. Now all I have to do is install the retaining snap ring. We simply start one end, holding it down with our finger so it can't slide out, take it, twist it, and allow it to work itself in place, moving around till we get to the end. This is the correct positioning of the end of the snap ring so that the ends are encompassed by its retaining groove. Improper positioning would show that the snap ring is ending within one of the reliefs. If you look to the inside of our clutch pack assembly, we'll notice all these little tabs, which are the tabs, engagement tabs on our friction rings. We have found that by pre-aligning them, by using a small screwdriver or any other suitable device, it can make installation assembly of these components a little bit easier. This completes the reassembly of our forward clutch subassembly. All other clutch and piston assemblies are reassembled in the same manner. To disassemble and inspect the 2 to 3 direct clutch, intermediate band, and intermediate roller clutch assembly, we'll first remove the band and inspect it. This band shows signs of wear, slight overheating, and rupturing. The surface is very pitted. Even if the band looked very good, for what they cost and the amount of work it takes to replace one, you're best to replace it and be safe. We have a one-way clutch built in here, as you did in the other unit of the trans, and we check it the same way. You notice it'll only rotate in one direction and immediately stop when we try in reverse direction. You also want to check, as before, for smooth operation. To visually inspect the surfaces, the rollers, and the springs, and for better cleaning, we need to remove this cover plate. The cover plate is retained by this snap ring. To remove the snap ring, we insert a tool through this little relief and up under the ring. Lifting it off, now we can remove the cover plate. This cage encloses the springs and the rollers. To be able to see them, we want to lift this ring partially up, but not so far up that it removes itself and we lose all the parts. As in the previous one-way clutch, now we can see and inspect all our springs, condition of all our rollers, and the condition of our outer ring. This unit looks okay. We can leave it apart like this for cleaning. The remaining disassembly procedure of the direct clutch is identical to that of the forward clutch. We remove the snap ring, which holds the clutch pack in place. Remove the pressure plate. Our clutch pack. And now we need to use our spring compressor to remove our spring retainer and our piston. We have the same layout as our previous piston with an internal and external sealing ring. This completes the disassembly of the direct clutch.